Well, I'm excited today because I believe what we're about to talk about is going to revolutionize selling flowers for flower farmers. So I'm excited to have Amelia on the Flower Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here.
Well, I had totally fallen in love with your product and I can't wait to hear more about that. But right now, I want to hear about you and your story and how you got, I hate to say hooked on flowers, but we'll say that. How did you get hooked on flowers?
I got hooked on flowers in probably not that unusual a way. I think I sort of walked into flower farming very, very naively. My background had nothing to do with flowers or gardening or growing anything. And in 2017, I just sort of had this realization that I was spending my whole day working at a computer and really didn't feel like I was producing anything tangible, and kind of had this epiphany that I needed to do something. And of course, flower farming is what came to me in the middle of the night one night. And
Some would say that might be a nightmare that came to you, but I'm excited though that you didn't see it that way.
No, no, it was the contrary, because it felt very much like a refreshing approach, and just doing something that actually, I think you have a tangible output to what you're doing. You can actually see the product of your labor, and I think it's something that can be really fulfilling for people, and I definitely fall into that category. I think I say naively because, of course, very few flower farmers know what is entailed with
Right.
taking on that journey on day one. But looking back, I wouldn't do it any other way. It's been such a fun process.
So did you grow up liking flowers, being involved with plants, anything, or was it you just
No, I didn't. My grandmother was a gardener, so she grew up farming, and so she and her husband both, they were farmers. That was their family, and their background, and so we kind of, I guess it's in the blood there, and but personally, it was never something that I did much of growing up. We grew up in a rural community. And so there were a lot of farms around us. So I guess through osmosis, it was just kind of part of my upbringing, but not firsthand experience until I decided I'm gonna start a farm. And so I had spent a fair amount of time on farms growing up. It was more kind of in the livestock category, I guess, than flowers. But flowers felt like it made a lot of sense here, because when you kind of looked around, we're in rural New Hampshire, and when you kind of looked around our community, we had a lot of produce farms and a lot of livestock farms. So those markets were really saturated. So the idea of kind of deciding to start something in those areas really felt like an even bigger undertaking to do
mm,
something like that well. Whereas there really weren't a lot of flower farms around here. I think since then it's grown, and also the operations that were around have grown as well. So we've built up a nice community of growers here. But at the time, it just felt like a more feasible career path for me.
sure? Well, it's interesting because I think to myself, okay, all of a sudden you've had this thought, this new revelation. And did you have land already, or did you have to look for some, or did you already have kind of those pieces of the puzzle in place?
We had just moved. To a place where we actually had land, so we actually had the option of trying to build a farming operation, which wasn't possible for us before. We were in a home that just didn't really have any yard or space to grow anything. And so we did have land, but had just recently moved into it. And it felt like it was just being wasted, kind of sitting out back there with nothing to do with it, but besides a yard. So we felt like, let's give it a try, and had to have spent many years since building the soil, because it really was not in great shape when we started, but have learned a lot since then.
Mm. I know I feel the same way in the house that we're renting. After we sold our house last year, I look to my backyard and it's like it's just torture to me because never have I ever owned, well, maybe a little bit, but really never to this extent, um, such a perfectly flat blank canvas to like totally mold into whatever I want it to be. And I'm not about to do it in a rental property. So and so I'm kind of like, ugh, it's so frustrating. It feels like such a waste. I totally understand.
Yeah,
But
no, it was just begging. It was begging for something to be grown on it. I think we made the right choice.
so tell us a little bit about that part of your business because I want to learn kind of, okay, so New Hampshire, the season's a little different up there.
Yep.
It's a lot shorter, I would think. Do you have a greenhouse? Do you do everything in the field? How do you do what you do?
Yeah, so we do most of our growing is in fields. We do have one NRCS high tunnel, so we got that through a grant from our local chapter here that we wouldn't have been able to build a tunnel without that. So I think for anybody who has not done the research on their local extension service options there and being able to point you in the right direction on grant funding for those tunnels, I would say definitely do some research because it's well worth it. It's made a big difference for us on season extension and that we really can extend on both ends of the season in theory. In reality, we really just do it on the front half because by the end of September we're spent.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So
Well,
we
and you can do a
do,
lot in the field. You know, you can do a lot of stuff that way.
yeah.
So I'm sure by then you're over it. So
Yeah.
yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead. I'm
no, we do.
sorry. I
No, that's
interrupted
okay.
you.
That's all right. Do most of our growing in field, and then we kind of start everything in our basement because it is a much shorter season here. So it is mid-March and it's about 6 degrees outside for us right now today. And that really means that, heating our tunnels, at least for us, it's just not practical in the winter. So we do inside starts and then move things, kind of harden off and move things out to the tunnel and then outside once we have our last frost in mid to late May.
So what is your biggest crop you grow in your tunnel this time, getting ready moving forward?
We've got a lot of tulips in there. So we bring tulips into production pretty early. And having them in the tunnel really is helpful because we can kind of probably get 3 or 4 weeks jump start on those tulips in the spring, which is really nice by the time you get to April to be able to have product up here, which is otherwise tough to do without a tunnel.
Sure.
Yeah.
And do you, what's your customer base normally? Like who do you sell to?
We've done a fair amount in CSAs and we do some DIY weddings, but most of our volume is really through wholesale. We do a lot to florists and designers, um, and uh, and kind of some locally, but a lot sort of moving product down into the Boston area, which is about 2 hours south of us.
Oh, okay. Okay. So when you say wholesale, you mean like selling to florists and wedding designers and people like that?
Yes, yeah. So not a retail sale,
Right.
which I think of as like direct to consumer, a CSA
Right.
or a bouquet that somebody's
Right.
buying.
Well, and I can see, I mean, I think there's so many benefits of doing that as a farmer. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. I feel like you pretty much, okay, so you've got this flower business going and you are growing these incredible flowers, and your season, you said, ends typically around September.
It ends with our first frost. So this past year, it actually was really early. I think September 9th was our first frost, which
Wow.
was very, very early for us. The year before, we were able to go into October. Though by that time we were just kind of praying for a frost. It was a long year. But yeah, this past year it was pretty early here.
So this is probably, is this your third or fourth growing season?
Um, Fourth or fifth growing
Okay.
season. We started in 2017. So
Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay.
yep.
So this is your fifth growing season, and what's interesting is at some point in this process, you, I get, I don't know, I'm going to edit myself on that one. That happens. Um, so at some point while growing, you obviously had this a new revelation, and that's what I'm really excited to talk about, and that is rooted farmers. And
Yeah.
so tell us about that. How did this idea come about? And I'm so glad. I feel like as a flower farmer, you obviously can talk to a lot of the pain points and a lot of the challenges that farmers have. So I'd
Yeah.
love to hear the story behind that and how it started.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of as we had been growing, and kind of understanding the landscape of selling flowers, and thinking more about having that be an income replacement, for me, where I would be able to leave my day job, and because I was working full time still, off the farm. And so thinking about how I could do that, we ended up buying an used old U.S. postal distribution truck. And so you kind of picture like a FedEx truck. And the thought behind that was to make a food truck, but for flowers, and we'd put a mobile cooler into it. And so as we were refurbishing this and thinking that we'd be able to kind of do pop-ups and be able to go to farmers markets and vend out of that. My youngest son started having some pretty serious health issues, and that brought us down into the Boston area. And we were there for a solid month or two. And so at one of his appointments, he was looking out the window, and for a little country boy to be in the city, he was looking out the window and said, "There are a lot of your trucks here." I said, "There are a lot of my trucks here." He said, "You should bring your truck to Boston." I was like, light bulb moment. I was like, I should definitely bring my truck to Boston. And my husband's sitting there shaking his head like, this is a terrible idea. Why are we going down this route right now? But that was really what sparked kind of everything that Rooted is today. Because, in kind of thinking about what that would mean for our farm, it was clear that we weren't producing with enough reliable volume from one week to the next to really support drives down to Boston every single week. But the florists that we knew, just who were in the Boston area, didn't want to have kind of this piecemeal relationship. They wanted to have somebody who they could work with reliably from one week to the next. And so I started working with some local growers and said, "Hey, what do you think about this idea of, we all kind of use my truck and we try to access the Boston market, and we bring product down there every week, and pre-sell inventory and then deliver it on, one day a week." And we got a group of us who were all game to give it a shot. And as we were doing that, it became clear that our system of this availability list of kind of using that tool to communicate our inventory just wasn't going to cut it. It was just way too time consuming. It was too complicated for the designers to really work through. A lot of it just didn't communicate the right information to the florists. And so they ended up not buying things simply because they didn't have information about whatever those flowers were. So I had been working with a developer and kind of floated this idea of, what if we built for our group of growers, what if we built an Etsy, but for flower farms, where every farmer uploads all of their own inventory. And for the buyers, it just sort of magically aggregates so that they're able to shop from lots of farms in one place. And so we did. We took a shot and built that out for our group, and ran that in 2019, and we're really surprised at the results. Our florist customers just immediately in the first week that we launched that platform doubled what they were spending,
Wow.
simply because they just had more information at their fingertips. And when we went out and talked to them about why, it all came down to communication, and how we were communicating different attributes about the products we were selling. And once we realized that, we kind of recognized that there was an opportunity there to, not only solve this problem for this group of growers, but to really bring this out as a tool to growers all over the place.
So in essence, what you've created is a sales platform.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not. So it's probably, as far as barrier to entry, it's probably a lot simpler than, having, people who don't like to go start their own websites and all of that kind of stuff. Or maybe they've used Etsy, but Etsy might not be as flower friendly because it's not intuitive for that industry. It's more of a non-perishable kind of situation, really.
Yeah,
um
we see people kind of coming from both directions. We see people either coming from a system like Shopify. So, they've been using Shopify or a Squarespace website, and they've been kind of trying to make it work with those setups.
okay, yeah.
But as they grow, they really, the amount of time it takes to effectively manage a system like that, it's just not worth it, to continue kind of investing that much administrative labor hours into that sort of system. And then we also see it on the flip side of, larger growers who have been working with the same customers for a number of years and have been doing it off of an availability list, and are not looking to build their own website and are not looking to, kind of build in that sort of infrastructure. And so instead they come onto Rooted, and are excited about having, just kind of cutting out a lot of that, a lot of the time sink, that they had been putting into that relationship management and communication.
So how does it really work? Because you've got two sides of the equation. You've got the florist and you've got the farmer. So how do you set this up?
So most of our growers that are coming on, are they're typically bringing on at least a couple of their own florist relationships because they're looking to streamline their sales. They're looking to make their sales more profitable, and they're often relationships that already exist, and they're just trying to grow those relationships or at least make them more profitable. In other words, make it a lot faster to be able to process the sales so that they aren't spending as much time doing the administrative work, and are able to actually grow more product, which lets them sell more product. And so it's this sort of self-reinforcing, really great cycle that happens, by offloading the work that we as farmers tend to do, that we don't typically enjoy doing as far as that part of the process goes. So generally farms are coming on. We offer help with setting up your online store. So we're happy to help you set up your availability list. And I hesitate to call it that, but that's kind of the most familiar term, I think, for what it is. But essentially you're creating a whole bunch of listings that live forever in your store here, and so you aren't having to, recreate the wheel every week as you're kind of listing product out there. And when you do it, instead of creating your own listing, what you're doing is actually selecting a listing from our database, and we've got thousands of flowers up there that you can choose from, and we add to them every week. So if you don't see something that you're selling, just shoot us an email and we can add that. And by doing that, what it allows is, when we create things, when we create a flower of any kind in our database, what we're doing on the back end is actually, assigning different design elements to it and saying,
Really?
this. So yeah, so something that florists really find helpful is being able to search and sort by different types of design elements. I think, fundamentally one of the reasons that Rooted, is so useful is that, um, farmers don't always speak the same language that florists speak. And so by simply
Sure.
allowing for a translation layer there, you're breaking down these barriers to sales happening, because you're enabling communication without actually putting that burden on either the grower or the florist. So now the florist can just simply search for airy elements or focal flowers or disc shaped flowers. And the grower doesn't actually have to do any of the work to create those listings because we do it all for them. So we have all of those sorts of design elements and things like cooler sensitivity and ethylene sensitivity, different attributes just set up already that you don't have to deal with. And so it just makes that communication process a lot simpler.
Well, I don't think I realized that. So even the images and all of that, you guys load those up, and so that's one level of
Not the images. No, the
Oh, okay.
images. Yeah. So we got a lot of, we really went into that conversation with our florists and put a lot of time into that. And what they said is they don't want to know what the flower is supposed to look like. They want to know what it actually looks like. And my stock may not look like your stock.
Okay.
And so really making sure that growers are uploading their own photos is actually an important piece of it. But we built a really simple image library so you can just kind of batch upload a whole bunch of photos from your phone and dump them in there, and then you have everything right at your fingertips there.
So then they upload the photograph, but then you have, and then they probably have to upload, stems in a bunch, things like that. Or I'm just trying to figure out exactly how, because I feel like you've done so much work already for the farmer. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what is it when they sign up and they start loading things in. What do they need? So they need a picture, and they just
Yeah,
need,
you need to know the name of the item you're selling. That's the
sure.
biggest thing you need to know. And you need a photo, which we kind of talked through. And then you need to have a sense for how you want to price it. But even that we're helping you with. So
Oh,
for
really?
a lot of, yeah, for one of the exciting things that we're really psyched to be able to offer this year is pricing help, pricing guidance on a lot of these different flowers. So things that um, you often can't find through wholesalers as a florist, and they're pretty commonly sold by small farms. And so what we did is take all of our sales information from last year, all the sales data, and build in a pricing tool to say these are the expected price ranges for these flowers that we see nationally across all of our farmers across the country. And so we give farmers guardrails to say this is sort of at the, you've priced this product higher than we would expect you to price it. You might want to think about lowering that price, or vice versa. If somebody comes in and they're trying to sell a cafe au lait for $1.75, you're going to get an alert that says this is a little bit too low. Or if you're right in that sweet spot, it lets you know that too.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
as a grower, you need your photo. You need to know the name of the item that you're selling, and then a sense for the stem length that you expect for that flower, and when you're hoping to sell it.
So, one of my biggest concerns at, because I used to grow flowers a little bit on the side when I had spare time. I always was nervous about projecting what was going to be available, and of course, too far in advance. There was a reasonable, like right now, I could say I could go cut 1,000 hellebore if I wanted to. 2 weeks ago, I wasn't sure if they were ready.
Right.
So at that point, how does that work? Because I would think that would be kind of a concern of just not being sure, being afraid to list something and then not know.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the more, even more experienced farmer, like very experienced farmers, can sometimes struggle with that sort of estimating yield question. Typically, what we see is farmers listing product about a week in advance. And for that, you're kind of thinking about what is your weekly cycle. If your florists are expecting to place their orders by Sunday morning, then maybe you're listing your product out on Friday night. And when you're listing it on Friday night, you're estimating what do I think I can deliver by Wednesday. So you're sort of getting in this habit of a weekly cycle, for which is really helpful for the florists, because then they know when to expect to see your product. And then it's really helpful for you because you can kind of validate as the season goes on. Was I right? Was I was I off? And how close was I? And you sort of learn how to more effectively estimate your yield as the season goes on and as your years of growing goes on.
Do you have the option to add inventory if you are off, like you underestimate, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh wow, it just hit 85 degrees and now
Yeah.
all my tulips are popping. So,
Definitely. Yeah, you definitely can add inventory at any time. There's no limit on that. And then if you were to show up at your florist and say, this is what you ordered, but hey, I actually have all these other tulips that I have with me right now. Do you want to buy these too? And if they say yes, you can just add it to their order right there and just edit the order. You can add it in, and then it's done and it's all in one place. And you don't have to worry about going back and tracking everything separately.
oh, that's a nice feature, being able to edit those orders like that.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so that's really from the farmer side. Now, from the florist side, How does that work on their end? I mean, there's just everyone has their deadlines of when things are up and they have to hop on, or there's so much here I want to unpack. I'm probably not doing this in the right order, but I'm really excited about it. And I'm trying to think. Okay, so if I'm a retail flower shop, how does it work?
So if you're a florist and you're looking to buy flowers, as a farmer, you can notify your florist that you have product. Typically, we see people setting up weekly cycles. That's generally what we see kind of from folks who are doing this on a regular basis is, they communicate with their buyers. They say, you can expect to see my product by Saturday morning and place your orders. I also, you can hit an email button from inside the platform and notify them that you have product. So then they just get an email that lets them know that you're ready for them to start shopping. And
Okay.
then as a florist, you get the email, you hop in, you are able to start shopping for all the product. If it's just one farm, you shop from that one farm. If it's many farms, then you're able to shop across all the farms that you're connected with and place a single order across everybody.
So you just said, as you're talking, a lot of times I just think of more questions that I'd be curious about. So if I'm a farmer, is it likely that other farmers in the area, once they learn I'm doing this, they hop on too? Because what a great tool for if you're a flower shop to have multiple farms all in one little place to do shopping. So how does the word get out to all these people? Is it just listening to the flower podcast, or is
Listening to
there
the flower podcast. It is actually, so it's really fun to sort of watch that expansion happen because I think for a couple of reasons. It's really fun for us because it's interesting to see how people hear about Rooted. And inevitably it's, a lot of different sources. Maybe a friend told them about Rooted. Maybe they read about it on, a Facebook group that they were kind of looking for, how do I sell my flowers? Maybe they heard about it on the flower podcast. And so there are a lot of different places where they tend to find out about Rooted. But I think what's really interesting is that there I think there's a misplaced scarcity mindset that we see sometimes
Hmm.
in among flower farmers, where you kind of are worried that if there's another farm in your area who's doing the same thing, you're losing your competitive advantage. And it's actually what we see time and time and time again is it's actually the opposite, is that the more farms that we bring on in any region, the better all of the farms do. They all increase their sales because more florists come onto the platform saying, this is where I can go and I don't have to deal with 5 different methods of ordering in order to place these orders. And I can find all sorts of product in the exact same place. And then they just end up just purchasing much higher volumes of locally grown product than they would in the past because it's just so much easier for them.
I know, and I may have shared this story a long time ago on the podcast, but there was a friend of mine who sold their business because another company wanted to buy the land it was on. So this was a restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
and meanwhile, across the street, Walgreens had built this, a store on the corner. Well, they were going to put in a CVS on this property right across the street. And I said, why would you do that? Why would you put a CVS right across the street from a Walgreens? And you'd think like that would be counterintuitive. Like you'd want
Mm-hmm.
to maybe go 3 blocks down the road at least or something. And what they basically said is studies have proven that when you have a business that's drawing people in, it ends up becoming a resource that more people come because they know that this area has what they need, and so it ends up increasing business for both actually, or a greater number of dollars flow through that system that more than you would think, which I find really fascinating, and I can see too that especially a platform like this that would be convenient and easy, that if I'm on there and I'm shopping and I'm like, oh, because not every farm has enough of what you need. Or maybe this week they're out of one flower, but this farm has another. I mean, while you're there, it just becomes a more convenient process. And I totally can see that with this. Um, and so I'm curious. So on the farmer side, okay, so maybe can we just briefly chat about the cost of it? Because from what I've read, it's free to florists.
Yep.
And then as a flower farmer, how does that work?
So we really mimicked the Etsy model where we wanted to, encourage people to list product, and we didn't want anybody to feel, discouraged at all from doing
Sure.
that. So there's when you sell product, there's a transaction fee. So we take 5%. But if you don't sell anything, there's no risk there. You're not out anything. So that was our thinking in having that transaction based fee. There is a subscription fee. We do charge an annual fee that's $150 for our entry level subscription. And our logic there is that we want to make sure people are actually serious about using the system. We do have a promotion going for members of Slow Flowers and ASCFG, and we're excited to have the Flower podcast in there too. So you can get a $150 discount on that subscription fee with the Flower podcast code that I'm sure Scott you'll list in our show notes here.
Absolutely. And we'll promote that too when we release this episode. And I feel like so $150 discount. That's basically free, right? Free for the
Yeah,
first year. So
yeah,
that's pretty incredible. Well, as far as the transaction fee goes, I know there's different size farms. Does that have any impact on that? I know, like with some people that might have bigger farms, they might think, "Wow, that may be a lot." But then at the same
yeah.
time, if if you are a smaller farm, that may not be a big deal because you're like, "I'm just excited to get my product in front of people." So how does that work?
I think it was really, really, really important when we were building this to make sure that we weren't blocking anybody out unintentionally from the system. We wanted to build something that was usable for the, kind of urban micro farm, but also really helpful and accessible to, a 6 to 10 acre operation where they are doing much higher volumes. And so what we decided to do for this year was to build in a premium tier membership where and you can apply your coupon code to that also. But for those farms where 5% feels like it's a little steep for the volume that they're producing, um, there are price breakpoints put in with those transaction fees. So the first 15,000 of sales are charged at the 5%, and then we have a sliding scale from there. So you're really kind of getting efficiency on the more you sell, the less you're actually paying for the platform.
Oh, that seems fair. I One of the things that I think about too, I'm not sure how this works at all, but I recently was had an email exchange with somebody that grows flowers here in my not in my area, but in North Georgia, and their little network. I hate to say little because it's not little, but their network of flower farmers continues to grow. Is there any kind of benefit to come together as a group or collective, or can they just all join the platform at one time and kind of then as a group they promote it? I mean, how would that work? Because I
We
know that's a question. There's a lot of that going on out there right
Yeah.
now.
No, there is. And I think it's great. I think it's really, one of the big challenges for so many farmers is actually physically moving their product, getting it from point A to point B, especially when you're wanting to access so many larger geographies or, areas where you're just kind of having to go to a lot of different florists to drop off your product. And so what ends up happening, I think organically over time in areas where there are groups of growers is these communities form and people say, let's band together, let's kind of work together to figure out how we can make it really efficient and cost effective for us to do these deliveries. And so, where we see collectives of growers working together to sort of centralize that distribution and be able to collaborate on moving the product, that's where a collective makes a lot of sense. And we do support that on the platform. So we have a lot of collectives that are on board who are using it for exactly that purpose, where they want one or two administrators kind of controlling all of the relationship management and dealing with all the customers, and then they also want to collaborate on actually moving the product and fulfilling those deliveries. So whether it's running a physical market or having deliveries or some combination of both, all of those are supported through the platform.
Wow. I mean, that's what a great tool, because I mean, that's one of the issues I feel like that kind of deters a lot of people is either the time investment or the don't, do we need a building, or, but I feel like it's like something like this helps create the infrastructure in a way, and just a rudimentary way, but yet a powerful way. How does that um, and my question just left me. Oh my gosh. Um, God, really, I hate it when that happens.
Were you
Um,
heading in like a community direction? Because at one point you were kind of going down that road, and I think
yeah,
that's a
that's fine.
great topic too to hit
Um,
on.
yeah, no, I think that's good. I was, but I was trying to do it in a way that, like this person who I know listens to the podcast, I didn't want them to feel pressure from other people. That's what I was trying
Okay.
to avoid.
Oh, okay.
But um, so let me think how to phrase that. Let me, so well, the one thing that I think about, especially because of this crazy year we've had, we just came through with the pandemic. Farming is such uh, an isolated business. I mean, as a person, as a human being, you don't always have all that contact. And in a way, I feel like being able to network uh, other farms together to kind of help pool, I don't want to say resources, but yet maybe hours, or maybe, I don't know, kind of build a sense of community. Do you see that happening a lot? I know we talked about collectives or
Yeah.
cooperatives, but just from the sense of community.
Yeah, we do see that happening. I don't know I don't know that Rooted can really take credit for that. But I think it's a core piece of our mission is to try to continue to facilitate that, because I think there if there is one sort of phrase that frames every decision we make, it's really this theory that a rising tide floats all boats. I think
Sure.
the idea that we're stronger than the sum of our parts when we do work together is true in so many different ways, because it is isolating, it is hard. There's so much that's out of your control as a farmer, whether it's the weather or
Right.
frost or pests, or the deer that I'm chasing in my bathrobe at 5 o'clock in the morning to get out of my fields. So there is a lot that's out of your control, and you're just much more resilient as an individual and as a business if you do have that support of your community, that I think is really, really critical, because we're seeing so much more demand for local flowers today than we did 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And that's great. But if you don't have a support system, if you don't have a network, if you don't have a group of friends you can kind of commiserate with and brainstorm about those challenges, that is isolating, and it's a big burden. So I think we are seeing it much more. We're seeing a lot of new collectives popping up. We're seeing a lot of just sort of kind of, you know, collaborating in different ways, whether it's, hours or um, look, I oversold this. Can you help me fill this order? Or if you're just if you're just trying to kind of, I don't know, be able to work with different customers in a way that kind of is more reliable, but maybe your operation is not able to supply every week, you can still help your florists find product by having that community of growers that you're close with.
Well, you just said something that sparked a thought, and this might be obvious to a lot of people. But in case it's not, I wanted to ask, we've been talking and describing this relationship between farmer and florist and this whole dynamic of the relationship and the incredible, you know, platform that you've created. What I'm wondering is if let's say I'm a flower farmer and I don't really have a lot of flower shops or florists in my area. Can I also use this to be retail if I want to sell CSAs or things like that direct to the public? How does
Yeah,
that work?
absolutely. Yep, you can. And you can list the same products out, whether it's, if you're wanting to sell single variety bunches and like a bunch of 10 stems or 5 stems, you can list that same item only once and decide, I want to offer this to my florist. And then I also want to offer this as a retail option.
Oh wow.
And then you just apply a markup and you say, for my retail customers, for my folks off the street that are looking to buy flowers, I'm going to apply a 30% markup to the same item. And then your customers see differentiated pricing. So your florists see the price that's appropriate for them, which is that wholesale price. Whereas your retail customers are going to see that marked up 30% price, and that's the number that they'll see, and neither sees the other's numbers, which is important. And it's also important for growers, I think, to remember that whatever you're selling to a florist at is not the same number you should be selling to your end customers. Those are two very different numbers, and you do need to remember that markup. But you can sell the same thing to both of those segments, or
Well,
just one if you prefer.
yeah. Well, the thing I also think about is how many in order to extend season, like a lot of growers will make Christmas wreaths or do, potted plants or amaryllis or nursery things. And I think there's a lot of things that they have the opportunity to sell a retail customer rather than a wholesale customer, which is what we're
Hmm.
talking about, because they might not be interested, but yet they've got, I think about your high tunnel and you have, okay, I could be growing potted amaryllis. I mean, it's not heated, so probably not, but if it was heated, you could grow potted amaryllis maybe for Christmas that maybe your retail flower shops wouldn't or florists wouldn't want, but yet your retail customers would. So,
Yeah.
and I just think
Yeah.
of all those things that you could, I mean, it's like a floodgate that you could use it for almost.
You hit the nail on the head, and we did not anticipate that going into last year, and we were really surprised by it, that people, so many growers were selling things that we were not expecting them to be selling unrooted. They weren't simply selling, and it wasn't even just for retail, it was to their wholesale customers too. They wanted to sell a lot of dried flowers. They wanted to sell, different evergreens to make wreaths, because they had a lot of florists who
Sure.
wanted to make their own wreaths, and the farmers are doing the foraging. They wanted to sell the wreath, bases. So they were selling the grapevine wreaths that they were going out and they were
Yeah.
building, and then they were selling a lot of the finished product items too. So what we decided to do this winter was to say, okay, well, let's actually build out a system that allows you to sell all these different things in an appropriate way for that item. So we now support cut flowers, which is really those single variety bunches, bouquets, buckets, wreaths, potted plants. You can sell your starts, things like that,
Yeah.
CSAs, a whole slew of options out there. And the idea there is just saying, if this is where, if our goal is to really streamline all of these sales and offload the administration for the farmer, then we should be supporting them in whatever they're doing to generate revenue for their own farm. We should be making that process easier. And whether you're selling flowers or wreaths, it should all be supported in the same spot for the grower.
Yeah. I just think about the interview we released a few weeks ago with Melanie from Dahlia May Flower Farm. And we were talking about selling tulip bulbs. I mean,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of things you could sell using this platform. And it's just nice to be able to, once you have your customers, I hate to say trained, but once you have, they understand the dynamic and trust the platform and see
Yeah,
how easy it is, then you can just add and add and add and add and add. And then
absolutely.
when somebody wants to add, I know you said just send you an email earlier. Is it really that simple? Just say, hey, I want to add my tulip bulbs to my platform, and then you go on the back end and create that. Or I mean, is that something that takes a little bit of time to do, or Did
If
I
it's
just
a
open?
flower, if, did
Did
you
I
open
just?
a can of worms?
Yeah, did I just open Pandora's box for
You
you?
know, I
So,
think the my high level answer to your question is we always, 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 always want feedback. That's not lip service. That's not a line. Like we actually want to be building something that works really, really well for farmers and for florists. And so I think, you know, we if you have an idea for something, tell us because we are today as kind of have put out this product that we're as proud of as we are simply because it's built by the community. I mean, these are all ideas that have been generated by people who are actively using the platform, and that's farmers across the country and florists across the country who are saying, you know, this doesn't work for my region. I need this instead. And so then we build that so that we make sure that it actually represents growers from everywhere and not just New England.
sure.
And so I guess that's my short answer, which is that yes, if you want to add something, you should definitely let us know, and then we can take a look at that. If it's a cut flower variety, that takes very little time, and we add that. You know, I always ask for a little bit of notice so that you're not trying to list it the same day that we're adding it, just to give us a little bit more time to do that. But yeah, that's a really simple process for us to do.
Well, you just said that made me think. So, at this point, I mean, you obviously still grow flowers, but has this become your full-time thing now? Because, I mean, this is a huge deal. So how's that working out?
It is a more than full-time thing. Yes, this is this is
That sounds so silly to put it that way, but anyway.
this is a 24/7 gig, but it's so fun. I love it. It's it's definitely my full-time focus. I am still doing flowers and still growing. I have incredible help here on the farm that I would not be able to do any of this without. But yes, this is kind of the full-time day job now, and I still have my farming side job too.
So I'm curious, as you've developed this, um, be- I didn't ask this question at the beginning, but I never heard like there was a tech background in your past. Was there? And
No, no,
were you like this sleeping giant for the tech world?
no.
Like
Oh
Silicon Valley
man.
is like going to be knocking at your door next.
No, that has been the steepest learning curve for me is that I had no tech background whatsoever. I like just would get so stressed out by all things technology that I kind of refused to deal with it. But the fact that and that's probably a really good lens to have when we're looking at how we build this is that if it doesn't stress me out, it's probably it's probably very usable
Yeah,
because of how much that can cause anxiety for me. So that's not a background that I have, and it's something that I've had to do a lot of learning on, because we are constantly trying to do kind of interpret what farmers and designers need into technical specifications for developers to be able to build that. And we have worked really hard to find an awesome team of developers who are really, really, really excited about working for this group of growers and florists and being able to build something that they actually want, as opposed to what the developer thinks they want, which is not always the same.
sure. Well, I have to confess, so we're gonna have confessional time now, that when I first learned about your platform, I don't know, because when did it launch? Was it last year?
We technically launched in 2019. I think we didn't really get people's attention until 2020.
Okay. So when I initially saw the launch, I have to confess I was a little skeptical, and I was like, I I'm like, well, this is real. Excuse me. This is really important. This is really good. It'll be interesting to see how farmers embrace it because I know when it comes to technology, I just know doing podcasts. And sometimes we have a few barriers either because of internet connection or things like that. And I thought, well, it'll be interesting to see how it gets embraced by the community.
Hmm.
And so, needless to say, number one, I've seen it now and I'm pretty amazed. Number two, I'm really excited to hear about how farmers are just totally, enjoying this process. Maybe that is enjoying the right word. I mean, I feel like it must be. Um,
I think they're enjoying getting their lives back because they just spend so much less time dealing with the stuff that they don't they don't like
so,
to deal with. Yeah.
okay, so I'm glad you said that because that was like on my list, but I wasn't trying to ask that question. Um, you know, time. I mean, that's a huge
Yeah.
component. I mean,
Yeah.
it's already a 24/7 job
Yeah.
farming. Um, and some of these farms, I have no idea. Like, how much time are they saving using this?
Oh my gosh, so much time, so much time. I was talking with a group of growers a couple of weeks ago, and they told me that they were able to process, um, I think it was more than twice as much volume. It was two or three times as much volume in half of the administrative labor hours. That's
Half?
crazy. Half,
Wow.
half to process twice as much volume. So, I think and that was with our site kind of still in the early stages of development, which is not where we are today. So I think, kind of circling back to your comments about internet speed and some of those challenges, they completely dictate how we think about building this system because it has to be if pages don't load because of internet speed, because there are a lot of places that are more rural. My street just got real internet this year for the first time ever, which is really exciting, but also it really important as we were thinking about building this is we didn't have internet. We had basically dial up internet until the end
Wow.
of 2020. So I think it's we were really excited to have so many farms willing to give feedback and willing to work with us on how do we solve these problems. And I think we're all so much better for it this year. Um, yeah,
So it sounds like you're continually developing this
yeah.
project of yours.
Oh yeah, this
Um,
isn't a set it and forget it
yeah.
situation. And you know what? It's so funny. We've built out boards just full of all of the ideas from our members that are we get on Zooms with farms and they're like, have you thought about doing XYZ? And we're like, oh, writing that down quickly so that we don't forget. Um, yeah, it's a continual process of development and making sure everybody's happy and having a good time with it.
That's great. Well, I always like to, as we wind down this interview, ask about advice. And of course, I'm going to jump in and say that one piece of advice I'm sure you would have is to, if you're a flower farmer or a florist, is to check out Rooted Farmers. So I'm going to steal that one away from you. And I'm just curious, yeah, what piece of advice maybe would you want to give, or maybe it's meant a lot to you?
I think I was thinking about this because I knew you were going to put me on the spot here, and I wanted to I wanted to add some actual value here. So I was thinking about this, and I think there are two different areas where I think I'd have two different sort of forms of advice, and one is on the personal front, and one is on the professional front. I think on the personal side, I think my advice would be to make sure that as a farmer or as a florist, you're always giving yourself grace as you're kind of walking through, and especially these days, it's life today is very different than I think what we were expecting it to be a year ago.
Yes.
And so it's just so important, even in normal times, in the before times, to give yourself grace and remember that with every season that you're doing this, that you're walking through your farming journey, every season that you're growing, every season that you're moving into sort of a new space, you're learning from it. And there's always next year, which I think is my personal advice, is to not be too hard on yourself, because I think a lot of growers tend to be hard on themselves, and I just hate seeing that. And then on the professional side, I think my advice would be to remember that, for a lot of folks, farming and flowers really start as a hobby. And I think that's really important because it means that you're loving what you're doing, and that's what's bringing you into this space, and it's what's bringing you into this career. But to also remember that you are running a business, and that there are ways that you can remember that this kind of is not your entire life, and it doesn't need to consume you. And there are ways that you can offload parts of that business so that you can still maintain your sanity, and be able to keep living your life in a way that isn't draining you 100% of the time. And so remember that you're running a business with this, and that there are places where you're going to be the expert, and then there are places where you maybe aren't the expert. And those places where you don't want to be the expert, or you don't feel like you're the expert, are the spots where you should really look for some help. And hopefully Rooted can help with that too.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you. And I love what you said about grace, because it's so funny. I listen to stories and I talk to farmers, and even myself. I remember growing things, and uh, you know, and like I wake up and I go out to the field, and the deer have found something, or the rabbits, or something has helped themselves to my sweat equity there, and I just think, you just at some point you get frustrated, and then you're like, okay, well, I guess next year I got to do it better. I got to build a
Yeah.
better mousetrap, or whatever you want to call
Yep.
it. And I think you have to get to a point as a grower that a lot of times you you stop fighting Mother Nature, and you just have to learn to roll with it.
Yeah.
And I think so many times we're good to do that with these circumstances that are out of our control, but we don't do that with ourselves as we continue to progress,
No.
and it's like, it's okay to say, okay, well, I guess next time I got to do better at that. And
Yeah, I think it's so important to just look at it as a lesson. Well, I won't make that mistake next time, and I'll learn from it. I think, as you were talking, it reminded me of, I think, my very favorite book, which is put out by the Stone Barn Center, and it's called Letters to a Young Farmer. And it is just a collection of letters from really, really experienced farmers, and people who are somehow involved in the agriculture space. And they're talking about all of those hard lessons that they learned through their farming journey, and they're trying to communicate those lessons to young farmers, to people who are either young in age or young in their position, and kind of where they are in their farming journey. And I think that's so validating for what you just shared about, kind of the lessons about growing, and taking those to kind of carrying them forward to future seasons and future years and future decisions. But I would definitely say take a look at that book, because it's just sort of story after story after story of all of these farmers who have been through some version of everything that we're all going through on a regular basis, and it's really
I've
encouraging.
I've never heard of that book, so I'm going to definitely check it out. And thank you for sharing that, because it sounds like something, I think a lot of people probably could really benefit from. So,
Yeah.
well, Amelia, thank you so much. You went away. There you are,
No,
Amelia.
I'm
Thank
here.
you.
I just was reaching down because I have it. I have it. You can see
Oh,
all my bookmarks in here of all the bookmarks that I have in my letters to a young farmer, because they're all just such great lessons.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you, Amelia, so much for being on the Flower Podcast. I know I've learned a lot. Hopefully, our listeners have. And I'm excited for more people to learn about your platform. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share this chat with you.